How are we doing? 4 minutes.
trust in the government. You bring in all these things together, and this is a great gift for fascists. That's it.
Okay, let's now do the next step. And I agree with the dark image you painted of where we are. Okay, there is now why the answer that I will give you now, and I don't believe in it, but I want from you a theoretical confirmation. Why? Because a naive old Marxist leftist would have said, perfect, with these neo-feudal corporations, everything is already there, centralized, we just boom, boom, nationalize it, and we are in happy. So why this doesn't work?
Well,
because it seems at some naive point the obvious thing to do.
I said that to the good people of Google inside their den. They were very kind. A few years ago, they invited me to go to their campus in California to give a speech inside of Google. I entered Google and gave a speech. And they asked me to speak about digital money, which of course they're very interested in. And what I said to them was, well, not exactly that, but I said, look, the problem with you guys is that, your search technology is so stupendously wonderful that you have invented a human right, the right to do a Google search. Because if you now, given that this is now available for everybody, if you deny you, if somebody, let's say the government, the world, extraterrestrials deny you the right to use Google, they're denying you a human right. It's so important to be able to search stuff on Google's and search engine that its denial is an aberration, an abdication of a human right. So the problem is, however, is that if you have invented a human right, if it is a human right, you have no right to own it. So you should all be nationalized.
And?
They looked at me.
Yeah.
I said, just kidding. So I continued to the next one. Either they would have kicked me out or gotten a heart attack. So the problem, however, with nationalizing is that these are not national corporations. Google is not a national. What nations, what country, what state is going to nationalize? Even the United States cannot. They're everywhere. They're in every nook and cranny of the digital space of planet Earth. Facebook, how do you nationalize Facebook? You can internationalize it, but for that you need a world government. And the moment you start saying that, nothing happens. You leave. All right? For me, the trick is to create a transnational movement that challenges the ownership of corporations. Since the 16th century, we have a monstrosity that is growing within the bosom of our societies. The idea of liquid ownership, of shares. Think about it. We take it for granted. Okay? I could have a corner shop that makes bicycles. I can sell it to Slaway. That makes some kind of sense. But the idea that you have a large corporation and you take the ownership of a corporation and you slice it up in tiny little pieces called shares, which then trade them in like competitors, like baseball cards in the United States. And decision-making about what a company does is based on the general assembly of the shareholders who are anonymous. And the more you of those pieces of paper you bought, the more votes you have in the general assembly. Now, if we didn't have capitalism, imagine this is the 16th century, and I were to propose this system to you, you would have thought I'm mad. And very rightly so. We know what happened with the first joint stock company. It was the British East India Company. 1599, London. It was a time when Hamlet was finishing, not Hamlet, Shakespeare was finishing Hamlet, not the other way around. Okay? Within 10 years, that company became bigger than the British state. They had 200,000 soldiers with which they expropriated India, Indonesia. They destroyed millions of people's lives. And this is the very basis of capitalism, the idea of as many votes as I can buy, depending on wealth. Because you see, Jeff Bezos became by $50 billion richer during the pandemic. He didn't do anything during the pandemic. He's a smart man. There's no doubt that Jeff Bezos is smarter than I am. He's a far better entrepreneur than I am. That goes without saying. Okay. But the 50 billion that he made during the pandemic, he didn't work for. He was making it in his sleep. You know, the wealth he had in the stock exchange was breeding more wealth. And by the way, in ancient Greek and in Greek, the word for interest is the same as the word for giving birth. Yeah? Actually, labor, female labor. So I have a very simple alternative to taking over and nationalizing. So who's going to run Facebook? I mean, if you imagine if I made you managing director of Facebook. I mean, we would shut it down. It would stop functioning, or me, for that matter. This is not taking shots, cheap shots at Slavoj. Imagine if we had a very simple change in corporate law, where we say that shares become like library cards in a university. If you enroll in a university, you get a library card. It gives you privileges. You can take books out, you can connect to the internet, you can go into venues, you can vote in elections, students' union elections. Right? You can't sell that card. You cannot hire it, you cannot lease it, you cannot buy it. There's no market. It's your right to have it. It's like a vote in the political arena. Right? You can have it, you can use it, and you can't sell it or buy it. At least not formally. Imagine how that would transform the world. Suddenly, Facebook will belong only to people who work there. And imagine if at the same time we introduce another change in ownership rights, so that people own their own data, and Facebook cannot touch without paying you. The world is transformed, all of a sudden. Those large companies are going to shrink. Why would they shrink? Because if you have a company with 800,000 workers, and they all have one share each, they can't run it. It's too many. It's, you know, the optimal size is what? At most 10,000 people. So they would themselves decide. You don't even need the state to come in a Stalinist way and take it over and break it down. This is why I put a lot of emphasis on, as Marx did, wishy-washy stuff about social justice and equality. That, for me, means nothing. It is simply bourgeois claptrap for the purposes of massaging our conscience. You want to talk seriously about liberating people from the shackles in which they live? Change ownership rights, change corporate law, and make shares non-tradable. One person, one share, one vote.
Next step. Okay, we shouldn't, I don't know what time it is, but we still have at least two important points. One is, we are both, on the one hand, critical of China, but at the same time, we don't simply buy the Western narrative, you know, evil, totalitarian China, the threat to, and so on. This afternoon we talked about a figure, I suppose you, well, go to Google and search for him, Wang Kuni, who is now probably the most influential intellectual in the world, because in China the real power is in the 7 members of sitting committee of the Politburo or what. He is one of them. It's an extremely...
Is he the modern version of Suslov? Do you remember Suslov?
Wait. don't. Now we are entering eroticism because Suslov is my favorite. Now you will have to suffer 1 minute.
I didn't know that.
Yes. You know why? You know who was Mikhail Suslov, the embodiment of the irrationality of Soviet system.
That's right.
He was extremely influential, but you know what was his function? And he survived them all. Stalin, Khrushchev,
Everybody.
Brezhnev. He had, these were pre-digital times. He had, pre-digital times, a couple of shelves with thousands of cards, quotes from Lenin for all occasions. If, for example, Russia wanted a war with Finland, 39, he found a quote from Lenin
That
in
worked.
Russia, and all of them, from Stalin onwards, came to him. This is the party line. Find quotes from Lenin to
To support it.
And it's incredible how what he did didn't have any influence.
It's a bit like the Bible.
Yeah,
You can support anything. There's
Yeah.
some line in the Bible that supports whatever you do.
yeah. So, Suslov, yes. And I wonder if we ever get close to power. Not to be Suslov, not you. But that's another story. Okay, sorry.
If we go close anywhere near power,
Yeah.
I'll be in the gulag and he'll be in the Politburo.
Absolutely, and I will repeat my joke. I told this to Peter Sloterdijk already. And even if you are in Gulag, I will still show my friendship to you. You know how? In Gulag, every Sunday, you get a little bit better soup. Two rotten heads of a fish or something like that. I will make a call from Moscow. You will get double portion of this soup every Sunday. But let's go on serious stuff. No, this guy in China, Wang Kuning, he wrote 30 years ago in the late 80s. He visited for a couple of months United States, studied everyday life and so on, and wrote a book, America Against America, where what he wrote there is today with Trump and so on more true than ever. He saw the creativity, but at the same time the decadent, self-destroying elements of the American system, and his big fear was if China is exploding in this new capitalism, how to prevent Americanization, this destructive aspect. That's the reason. It's not simple totalitarianism. What he is the ideologist, so media claim, behind what President Xi is doing now, which is what? Remember, a double at two levels, these so-called, but we wrongly call them like these, reforms. I was shocked, I cannot but repeat the joke that already told it to you. I read that the Chinese authorities party prohibited something called 996. Now, I was a little bit shocked from my decadent late 60s sexual revolution years. I didn't participate in it, but I knew what's going on. 6-9 was associated with double oral sex. So I said, what's happening? The Politburo, the Communist Party prohibiting sexual practice, no? So then I learned. It's a very sad story. 996 means the practice imposed by big corporation in China. 6 days a week, you work 12 hours, 9 to 9. But I wasn't totally wrong in my reading, because this guy, Wang Huning, openly describes himself as a neo-conservative. He, even between the lines, delivers an insight with which I fully agree. That, and Alain Badiou hates me for saying this, that the real cause of this exploding capitalism in China was the big cultural revolution, which destroyed tradition and create, empty subjects. The big thing during cultural revolution was destroy monuments, get rid of Confucian past, and so on. So now Wang Huning problem is how to keep the capitalist dynamic, but with more justice, more moral authority, and so on and so on. Okay, I just described the situation which you should read about others. My question to you, will it work? Does it have a chance?
Does what have a chance? China.
No, this strategy specific, let's call it neo-conservative strategy of combining, keeping capitalist dynamic, but Wang Huning emphasizes also cultural values and so on, you know.
I don't think it does. I don't think it does have a chance.
Sorry?
I don't think it does.
But why not? This is
well,
my feminist position, you are comment here.
I have no idea, but I will start speaking, giving an answer, hoping that I will form it by the time I reach the end of the sentence. Is that okay?
You're talking like a Hegelian. Okay, yeah.
Okay, well, to begin with, let me make a political statement about China. I'm a liberal Marxist. In China, I would probably be under house arrest or even worse, probably in some cell. When the Hong Kong Polytechnic students rose up and they were brutally beaten by the police, I support them. When it comes to the Uyghurs, Tibet, and so on, I'm more than happy to come out and condemn with all my strength the authoritarianism of the Chinese Communist Party. But at the same time, Trump started a new Cold War against China. It was his choice, his geostrategic and ideological choice. He even went against Apple for producing iPhones. It was a Trumpian choice. I'm not saying that it's wrong because it's Trump, but I remind you that it was Trump's choice. Biden comes along and he adopts it completely and actually turbocharges it as well. So there's an attempt now to create a new Cold War, which could even become hot with the stability about Taiwan and so on, because they're upping the ante there. And you can see that the European Union is being forced and dragged into this with Huawei to begin with. They banned any European country from having dealings with Huawei, even though Huawei had the best 5G system and the cheapest to our poorer countries. Have not been allowed to use by the Americans through Brussels. And there is an attempt to present China as a new Nazi. This is all dangerous stuff. China is a very large country with ambition, long memory, but they are not imperialist. They have never been imperialist. China has never colonized any place in the world. Even the skirmish with Vietnam was a skirmish about local issues. It was not an attempt to take over Vietnam. If they wanted to take over Vietnam, they would have taken over. People say to me, what about Africa? Wherever you go in Africa, you find Chinese investments. Well, yes, the Chinese have a strategy of securing supplies of raw materials that they don't have. Long time ago, it was 2005, I was in Ethiopia, and I was told by government officials that the airport, brand new airport back then, was built by the Chinese government for free. Okay, why are they doing that? For free. The Americans have never built anything for free anyway. Even when you hear the words US aid, it's not aid, it's loans to be paid with interest, not the same. The reason is that, you know, they went to Angola, they went to Ethiopia, they went to wherever they thought they could find rare earths or oil or gas, and they put the governments and the people in their debt by building infrastructure, hoping that, you know, when the deal would be made for all these natural resources, they would get preferential treatment. This is using one's exorbitant power in one's favor. Yeah, but compare and contrast with what the Europeans did in Africa. We destroyed the whole continent. We enslaved their people. We killed Lumumba. but imperialism did. We created South Africa. Europeans created South Africa. It was not the Africans who created apartheid. You know, think of American imperialism. My country was a fascist dictatorship under the CIA. Chile, Iran, Mossadegh, and so on. What audacity to be accusing the Chinese of being imperialist. They're doing business. I remember when I was dealing with them as finance minister, the Troika had imposed upon the previous government that we give the Port of Piraeus to Costco, a state-owned Chinese company. Of course they took it. They wanted it, right? Whose fault was that? It was the fault of the European Troika and the American Troika forcing the Greek government to give the Port of Piraeus to Costco. When I became minister, for a short period of time, the people of Costco and the Chinese government thought that I had power. So did I for a few months. Okay? And when I negotiated with them, I said that we tear up the contract and I want completely different terms. Hugely in our favor. Massive investment that they have not agreed to put into the port, moving beyond the port, creating super fast railway that we don't have in this. And they said yes to everything. Now, that's if that is imperialism, let's have a little bit more. Yeah, and when you see that there is a lot of investment, and some of it is not good. In Serbia, for instance, in Montenegro, where they go in there and they give loans, 4% interest rates. Why are they getting into Southern and Eastern Europe? Because Europe is not investing. There's a vacuum. The European Union is not investing. Chinese money comes in. They don't bring in troops. They do not overthrow our governments. They do not spy on our politicians. So let's be very clear. The Chinese Communist Party's authoritarianism needs to be countered and criticized. All the crimes against the Uyghurs and so on have to be called out. I'm making no excuses for them. But at the same time, no Cold War. What the Americans are doing there is twofold. First, they want one thing, to take over their big tech. Because big tech is American. Google, Facebook, and so on, they're all American. Europe has no competitors, zero. We are a desert when it comes to big tech. And since big tech is going to be the future will be American, it will not be European, because we've decided not to invest here in Europe, right? The only country that has worthy competitors to Amazon, Alibaba, to Google, to Uber and so on, are the Chinese, because they've created a space in which they invested, and their banking system, which they are not allowing Wall Street to take over. What the United States regime wants, from Trump to Biden, is to take over Chinese finance and Chinese big tech, while trying to sell lots of armaments to Australia, to New Zealand, in the Pacific. You heard about the deal with the so-called AUKUS deal with the British and so on, which left Macron very peeved, right? So this is arms deals and taking over the big tech and finance industries that the Chinese people have built up with a lot of care and with a great deal of ingenuity. Do we want to be part of this? I don't think so. Now, that was my statement. I had to make a political statement. I am a politician after all. But to your question, I think that the attempt to create an authoritarian, conservative, Confucian, whatever you would call it, system in China is going to fail. Because in the end, the development of the means of production always clash with the antiquated social relations and prejudices.
Sounds familiar.
Familiar,
Some
eh?
German guy said it.
Yes,
Yeah,
a German guy
yeah.
said that. And President Xi already showing signs of realizing. The other day he came up with a remarkable statement. I really thought this guy or somebody behind him who wrote this statement understands this stuff. He said the only way we are going to increase the wages of Chinese workers is if we reduce the growth rate of China. You never hear an American president say that, or a German president say that, Chancellor. So he understands that what's going on in China is you have huge growth rates, which they engineered, but at the same time, to have those huge growth rates, there was a very strong class war against the working class of China. And now what he's saying is, we need to ameliorate for that. We need to rebalance it. We need to become focused against the capitalists of China. And this is the Chinese Communist Party that created the capitalists of China. So it's very interesting. And I don't think that it will be easy to contain the progressive forces within China in the way that Confucian right-wingers would like.
I agree with you here. And just to supplement, maybe all of you, you should know this. Don't know. You know, no. I am in the same position as you. For example, since I also signed some manifests against Hong Kong brutality and especially against some students in Beijing universities who wanted to organize workers who were dying of pollution.
The new Marxists.
Sorry?
The new Marxists.
They disappeared. You know, they literally, one story, I knew one, I was in contact, he disappeared. His mother inquired too much what happened to him. The result is well known if you are Hegelian, negation of negation. She disappeared. But what I want, what you have, immediately, I will not talk. What you have to remember is nonetheless, this is a big, as you said, non-imperialist trauma of China. Do you know that in 1820, China was not per capita, but absolute product, by far the economically strongest country in the world, 3 times stronger than Great Britain.
And do you know which was the second one?
No.
India.
Yeah, also, yeah. And do you know then something happened? This was big business. In Bengal, enormous amount of opium were grown to be exported to China. This was not a couple of merchants. This was mega.
Because they wanted tea. The British wanted tea
Yeah.
from China because it was the best tea.
Yeah.
And Indian tea was rubbish.
Yeah.
So they grew opium in India and exported it to China in exchange of their...
Yeah. And then, now comes the horror. The Chinese emperor wrote even desperate letters to the young Queen Victoria and so on. She even didn't answer him. So the Chinese emperor just prohibited the import of opium. The result, you know. Great Britain, with the help of some other Western powers, attacked China with a wonderful justification. It was that free trade is the basis of civilization. If some country breaks this rule, it's becoming barbarian, it has to be forced to be re-civilized. Now comes the tragedy. Do you know that in 1840-50, over half, around 2/3 of Chinese BNP, brute national product, disappeared? It was an undescribable economic, social catastrophe. To imagine what it is, and I like to sell this to Americans. I haven't been to it. Like, imagine today, moral worth is the same. I like this idea. Who are the greatest? Colombia and who produces? Colombia and Mexico declaring war on United States because they try to stop opium exports from this country. This is what they did. So, you know, what I'm saying is that, as you, I disagree with many things that Chinese are doing. But the problem they are trying to deal with in this way are, my God, are the real problems of today. Okay, to gradually conclude, do you want to add something here?
I would like a few questions from the audience.
They will, after I finish.
They will all be dead then.
Sorry? No. What I want to say is just to clarify the last
Okay.
point where we are, as it were, in the same sheet,
Okay.
which is, and then the people are allowed their 3 minutes of let's play democracy.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, we were both absurdly accused of anti-Semitism and so on and all that. But it's absurd. But what I want to draw your attention, and especially maybe you were not yet told, actually also here in Slovenia, where we have a government now which is officially totally pro-Israel. When there was that last conflict with Hamas on the West Bank, you know that Slovenia was
He said.
together with
got that.
Slovenia was together with Hungary the only country which on all official buildings put together with Slovene and European flag also the Israeli flag. Now, in some recent scandals, European Union exploded against our Prime Minister about some remarks which can be anti-Semitic and so on, can be read in that way. And our defense was, but how? We totally support Israel. What they don't get is, and that's my question to you, would you buy this? I'm more and more convinced of it, and all my Israeli friends agree with it. One of the basic paradoxes today is the paradox of, mark my words, Zionist anti-Semitism. You find it already, it's incredible. You should read Theodor Herzl, Der Judenstaat, where he says already this formula that all anti-Semitic right-wingers like. Let's get rid of Jews here, send them to Palestine. In this way, we get rid of them, but there they will bring Western civilization, there will be a wall against primitivism and so on. You know who wrote, I quote it in my text, the same idea? Yes, that guy, Reinhard Heydrich. He said, we fully support Jews who want a state there. They will defend Western values, blah, blah. We just don't want them here. Breivik, you remember the Norwegian madman, said the same thing. And the tragic thing, I cannot even imagine the consequences, is that the Israeli government is playing this game. Look at Trump. He was the model of this. He fully supported Israeli expansionism. At the same time, he has openly flirted in the United States with anti-Semitism.
With Nazis.
Sorry?
With Nazis.
With Nazis, yes. This is, I think, one of the saddest aspects of the terrible situation we are in. Okay, I said my thing.
Well,
Now-
let me say my thing too here, because I need to make it clear. These are difficult times. Once upon a time, when the establishment
Sandalmaker.
wanted to assassinate our character of left-wingers, of difficult people like us, they called us communists, okay, or subversives, or Marxists. I don't mind being called these things. I'm all those things. I confess. Then they discovered another way of getting at us. To call us things that hurt. To call me a misogynist. I consider myself to be a staunch feminist. A long line of feminist women. My grandmother was a suffragette in the 1920s in Cairo, in Egypt, for God's sakes. My mother was an active feminist. I consider myself to be called a misogynist, even if I know it is completely made up. It hurts. To be called an anti-Semite, it hurts. Because I would wear the Star of David here. Whenever a Jew faces persecution for being a Jew. But at the same time, now we're in a situation where look at my friend Ken Loach, Jeremy Corbyn, to bring us down, our political opponents immediately slap this accusation on us simply because we're opposing apartheid. Because the problem I have with Israel is that it is an apartheid state. Now, I spent my youth in London being beaten up with others in Hyde Park demonstrating against apartheid when Mandela was in prison and Margaret Thatcher was calling him a terrorist. Right? I never imagined that apartheid would die in South Africa and be reconvened in Pakistan. Calling out apartheid. By the way, I have to give my thanks and great appreciation to our contacts in Israel, the B'Tselem organization, the human rights Jewish organization, that were the first there to call Israel. So, having made this point, I'm not surprised by what you say. The worst enemies of the people of Greece were Greeks. Every time we've been defeated not by ironclad foreign armies, but by our own folks. From time immemorial, even when the Persians invaded, half of the Greek city-states were the Persians. Half of them.
It's not the heroic Sparta.
No,
bringing all the
Thebes.
Greeks together.
Thebes was an ally. Thebes, next to Athens.
Yeah.
A stone's throw from Athens, was an ally of the Persians.
No wonder they
During the occupation, it was the collaborators that did the most damage, not the Germans. People ask me about 2015. Why did you lose against the Troika? Was it because Schäuble was so harsh? No, of course not. I knew exactly how harsh the IMF and Schäuble would be. It was our own people. It was division within our ranks and the fact that the Greek oligarchy was absolutely determined that the Greek people would get defeated and that we become a dead colony in which they... So, you know, this is not an exceptionalist argument about the Zionist anti-Semites. It's everywhere, except that the plight of the Palestinian people is so much greater than the plight of any other people, because they have been completely forgotten. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a mighty blow, because they were on the losing side of the Cold War. You had the migration from Russian Jews, strengthening the demographics and so on. And you had the abomination of Saddam Hussein trying to present himself as the defender of the Palestinians. Having a butcher defend your rights is the worst thing that can happen to you, right? And you have a situation where, until the latest uprising, most of my Palestinian friends and Jewish friends who support the Palestinian cause felt that the cause was dying day by day. But this very poignant uprising created new hope in purely Hegelian style of the liberation of the Jews of Israel. Because the worst victims after the Palestinians are progressive Jews in Israel who live under a Netanyahu kind of regime. You know, they are prisoners of an Israel that is completely against the interests of progressive Jews.
Agree. Just before, you should say... No, I will not say anything. Just give you... You know what we totally neglected? You are not politically a nobody. You have now DM and progressive...
I am not politically a nobody.
Almost nobody.
The negation of the negation.
Yes. But, my God, it fascinated me so much how that progressive international that you mentioned. Not just like a group of Trotskyists meeting in a basement. It's something serious going on. Please tell them in 1 minute.
It started, you know that I've been involved in PM25, which is a pan-European movement. We ran in elections with 9 members of parliament. But in the middle of doing all this, I was invited by The Guardian to write a comment on an article by Bernie Sanders in 2018. Bernie Sanders, no, actually the other way around. I was invited to write an article about what I think the problem is. How The Guardian does that. So I said the problem is the twin authoritarianisms. The authoritarianism of the liberal establishment and the authoritarianism of the fascism. And what we need is a progressive international, because the bankers and the fascists are internationalizing, only the progressive are not internationalizing, so we need a progressive international. And they gave this to Bernie Sanders, and they asked him to comment. They write a very nice comment, saying that was right and so on. And then they liked that, so they had the idea that you would ask him to write an article with me comments. So they took the topics like that, the 2 articles and the 2 comments. And then we go together, Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was actually one of the in 2015. He lent me enormous support during these negotiations with the Troika. He even threatened Christine Lagarde and the IMF that as a senator he would start the process of starving the IMF of funding if they continued doing what they were doing in Greece, which is remarkable. Not that he had the power to do it, but it was nice that it was a good thought. Well, he's one senator out of a Senate, but it was, it was extremely helpful. So we got in touch, and we said, okay, well, enough talking. If we both agree that we should have a Progressive International, let's have it. So a few months later, we met in Vermont. It was a wonderful gathering. All the good comrades, all the usual suspects. Cornel West, Susan Sarandon, Bernie Sanders, Jakobsdóttir, the Prime Minister of Iceland, and so on. So we made an open call. Then something horrible happened, and the whole thing was suspended. It's called the American election. Because the American election means that Bernie could not participate in this. I don't know whether you know that. If you're a candidate in the United States, you cannot participate in any international organization. Did you know that? So much for, worldliness of the American political system. So we put this on ice for a while, and then we recovered it, and a year and a half ago, we launched properly the Progressive International. And we've done a lot of work, which most people don't know about. But the whole point is to organize a common agenda of progressives and also a common set of actions, not just talk. Because the World Social Forum was great in the sense that we got together once a year, we chatted, and then we forgot about it. We were so impressed with ourselves that we forgot about it. It's a question of doing stuff as well. So the first action we carried out in December on that horrible day called Black Friday, which is, the great sale of the American consumerist machine, which has been expanded and brought to Europe as well. So on that day, we decided to target Amazon. And we had a campaign called Make Amazon Pay. And by that time, we had gathered trade unions and other organizations, climate change, activists and so on, all sorts of different movements. And they joined the Progressive International to the extent that we ended up with 200 million affiliated members. So to test the water and to test our capacity to act globally as a Progressive International, on that day we had a rolling strike in Amazon warehouses. It started in Bangladesh, it moved to India, jumped to Germany, from Germany to New Jersey, and from New Jersey to Seattle, with artistic events at the same time, projections on buildings, on Jeff Bezos' house. We projected Make Amazon Pay. There's a great picture of that. The headquarters in Seattle, Make Amazon Pay. So, and now we're continuing. We have a meeting happening in March in Chile, where everybody gets together. We have, people like Rafael Correa, a member of that. You are a member of that. You don't know it, but you are. Lula from Brazil. But also, the most important thing is we have young activists from Africa, and from Bangladesh, and from India. And you should hear them speak when they take the floor. 18, 19-year-old kids from Kenya and from Ghana. It's, it makes getting up in the morning and doing stuff worthwhile.
I cannot agree more. Thank you very much. Now, since I am a little bit myopic, would you, how we should organize
now,
it?
before you give the mic, before you, don't hand it over yet. It will have to be a woman that speaks first. Enough of men. And then a man.
And
Hello.
Luca.
It's an honor to hear you live, not just on YouTube. I have a question concerning Europe's enlargement processes and how and where does this fit Europe's economic agenda in context of the capitalism? And as you said, countries like China now are more keen on investing in countries like Serbia and Macedonia. So what is your standpoint and opinion?
It's a difficult question because we know why the European Union expanded so quickly. It was a kind of, I know this is a terrible term, it was a kind of Lebensraum, vital space for German and German-related industry. That's why Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland came in so quickly. They came in because of the expansion of the German industrial machine. Now, at the same time, what do you say to people in Poland, in Hungary, in North Macedonia, in Serbia, and so on, who say, we feel that we are going to be more protected in terms of our liberties? My response to that is, if that's how you feel, by all means come in, and we will support you. But make no mistake, the dearth of investment across Europe is not going to suddenly be waved away just because Serbia comes in. There will be no investment in Serbia in the same way that there is no investment in Croatia. How much investment is there in Slovenia? Yes, okay, this building, they paid some of it. Good, great. I'm now sounding like Monty Python. And what have the Romans done for us? But nevertheless, the investment is a huge problem. In Germany, they're not investing in Germany. In Germany is starved of investment, which is crazy because that country, Germany, has never had so much money as they do now. So, as a Greek politician, I have to answer that if it comes to the Greek parliament, that one of the former Yugoslav states is coming in, I'll vote yes. But I want you folks to think very seriously about the balance of power between your oligarchies and your working classes when you enter. You have a very authoritarian, right-wing, problematic, misanthropic government in Serbia, for instance. You're suffering under them. It is natural to think you'll get in the European Union and you'll be protected from your own government. Maybe it will happen, maybe it won't happen. Maybe the regimes are going to become even more solidified. Look at the liberal democracies of Poland and Hungary. Angela Merkel has bent over backwards to accommodate those fascistic governments. And they will continue to do this. So I defer to the peoples of those countries. If you want to come in, you'll have my support, but don't think that it will solve your problems by coming into the European Union. Courtesy of coming into the European Union on its own. And a lot of work needs to be done. There are instruments in the European Union that you can use for liberty and for progress, but it's not automatic.
Yes. Hello, Vlatka Kolarovic from Zagreb. I would like to ask you a question about us, people, users of these digital platforms you were talking about. Are we creating something in this world, or are we just slaves, or are we important, like users of all this digital world around us?
I use digital technologies all the time, and I'm fanatical about them. I love them. Okay? But as a boring old Marxist, I will have to say to you, never fetishize the instrument and never turn against the instrument. Turn against the social relations of ownership and production of the instruments. So let's change the way in which these technologies are being produced and used, but for goodness sake, use them. And use them against those who are providing them to you.
Hi, I have a question about Wolfgang Schäuble and a question about the library card ownership of stocks. So Wolfgang Schäuble, what would you have done if you were in his shoes? Would you simply do as he did, which seems to me basically to be defending what he thought were German geopolitical interests?
You see,
And just a
let me
quick-
answer this question, and you ask this the one immediately afterwards, because I'll be very, very brief. I would never be in his shoes. They would never put me in his shoes, because this is not a personal thing. There are certain economic and political interests that wanted somebody like Schäuble. I remember a discussion between Noam Chomsky and a BBC journalist, and Chomsky was going on quite correctly about the inherent bias of the media. And the media tell one story and they will never tell another story. And this journalist said to him, a very nice journalist, good, Andrew Marr, a good BBC journalist, and he said to him, Professor Chomsky, are you telling me that you think that I am saying things I don't believe in? That what I'm saying to you has been imposed upon me by a system? And Chomsky turned around and said, no, I am convinced that you believe in what you're saying. But if you didn't believe in what you were saying, you would not be having that position. So, similarly with Schäuble. So, what's the second question?
Question was about the library card ownership of stocks, and I was simply wondering if you had any thoughts on Yugoslavia's tradition of self-management, and you thought if that was kind of useful in your thoughts.
Absolutely. The Yugoslav self-management model was an incredible experience for the world. I know people, Americans, who came here in the 1960s to study the Yugoslav self-management model because it was a success story. Right-wing economists, not left-wing economists. It was ahead of its time, because digital technologies are important for the management and governance of self-managed firms. The capacity to communicate through fora, through intranets, through apps, to vote, is much enhanced when you have digital technology. You didn't have that in Yugoslavia. You had to do everything with paper and actual physical meetings of workers, which made them, Oscar Wilde, they last so long, socialism will never take place. There were aspects of the Yugoslav model that I didn't like, for instance, too much hierarchy. You elected the hierarchy, but there was far more hierarchy than was necessary. It was an attempt to emulate capitalist enterprises with voting. But the reason why the Yugoslav economic model, self-management model, collapsed was not because of its inherent dysfunctionalities. It was because the government of Yugoslavia between 1971 and 1975 made a huge error of borrowing large, gigantic amounts of money from American and Western banks at an interest rate of 2.5–3%. And the moment the oil crisis pushed interest rates to 20%, Yugoslavia was over from an economic point of view.
I have a question, please.
Where are you? I can't see you.
I'm on the
there you
right.
are.
Hi. So, quite a few years have passed since the Paris Climate Agreement, and as we can see, situation is not getting any better. It's actually getting quite worse. So, how do extreme climate events fit into your progressive agenda if, on one hand, we have people who are judged by not using linen bags to shop, and there we have on the other side Paul Allen, who crushes a complete and full coral reef with his super yacht. What can we do, and what is your agenda that can we use all of us?
Well, firstly,
Thank you.
the great concentration of wealth is terrible for the environment. You just gave an example. You know, when the 1% of the 1% has so much power that they can actually usurp agendas, even green agendas, and they can do plenty of greenwashing. I mean, look at the European Union now. Those ambitious targets include using wood pellets, from turning ancient forests into plantations, and they call this green. So when exorbitant power is running the green transition. The green transition is never going to be green. The number one priority should be investing in renewable energy and creating a union, a proper union. It's remarkable in the European Union that we don't have an energy union. Do you realize that? Every country plans its own renewables, which is crazy. You know, just think of how Europe looks from a satellite. It's not that huge a place. To have a German plan, an Italian plan, a Slovenian plan, it's madness. You know, and an extraterrestrial will tell you. Go and find one. She will tell you. So we need. Our movement's estimation was that we needed 3 years ago 500 billion euros a year for the green transition, especially when it comes to energy. People say, "Oh, this is a lot of money. Where are we going to find it from?" Well, you're printing it anyway and giving it to Deutsche Bank to give it to Volkswagen to buy its shares. So there's a very simple way. Even within capitalism, even within the European Union as we have the European Investment Bank. It's in Luxembourg, the armpit of the universe, right? It's there, it's sitting there in Luxembourg. Well, it can borrow money by issuing bonds. Well, issue 500 billion worth of bonds on behalf of the whole of Europe. This bank belongs to all of us, Europeans, okay? And have the European Central Bank support it. Even buy those bonds off it if needs be. So suddenly you have $500 billion every year to spend on an energy union. But we're not doing any of this. And the reason why we're not doing it is because our politicians are in the pockets of the large corporations that want to sell their own windmills, right? Which are not part of any plan. They just go and put a 200-meter windmill on top of a mountain, which is terrible for the mountain. No, the local community hates it. It turns the local community against renewables, and it's not part of an integrated plan. And when it rots, this thing, it's not even recyclable. So it's a question of using green Keynesianism, if you want. You know, these instruments, like the one that I gave an example of, the European Investment Bank, the European Central Bank, these public financial instruments, they're tools. We have them. Use them to mobilize huge quantities of money and press them into the service of the green transition, and then moving towards a decentralized, self-managed grid. You see, the beauty of renewables, unlike oil or natural gas or nuclear, all these need huge factories, economies of scale. So somebody's going to own them, either the state or some individual or corporation. But with renewables, you can have, solar panels everywhere. You can have small windmills everywhere. You can have hydrogen producing renewable energy. So hydrogen will replace diesel in trucks and so on. And all these the ownership can be dispersed, different neighborhoods owning different cells of that network. But that means going against the grain of the interests of corporate capitalism that wants to concentrate all power in their hands. Luca. Okay.
Is this the end?
Is this the end?
If I was given a mic, I will pose a question. I believe that it was in 2011 or 12 when, Slava, you said that Alexis Tsipras was the most dangerous man in Europe, right? Yeah. But it was
history writing of history is not yet finished.
Self-rewriting of history. But at that point, I believe it was correct, and I believe you will agree too, because the Southern Europe was more or less going underwater. Greece was in financial trouble, Italy was in financial trouble, Spain, Portugal, and so on.
We still are.
Still are. And the gamble of Syriza and Tsipras back then was, if we ascend to power and if we threat the European authorities with defaulting, not repaying our debts, the panic on financial markets will spread to Italy and Spain and Portugal and so on, and they will have to change something in their policy towards those countries. That was assessment in 2012, and I believe it was correct, and that's why I agree with Slavo's description of Tsipras at that time. However, Syriza have not come to power in 2012, but in 2015. And then, until then, two major things changed. The first is that Draghi, that you mentioned him before, already made his famous proclamation, whatever it takes, I'll do whatever it takes to save the euro. And second, as if anticipating Syriza coming to power, in January 2015, he started with quantitative easing.
No, 1st March.
1st March, okay. Okay, then it was...
It's important, because we were already in government.
Yes.
And we could have stopped that.
And
See what I'm
yes.
saying?
I know. That's why I'm asking. When you came to power, Mario Draghi started with quantitative easing. That means printing money, buying government bonds. So the south of Europe was still underwater, but Mario Draghi came and gave them, so to call it, brief. They could survive underwater, Italy, Spain, and so on. Sure. And that's why they are still underwater. But a straw was given to everyone, but to Greece. So my question is, in that circumstances, I believe your game was kind of lost from the beginning.
No, you weren't here at the beginning, were you?
I was here at the beginning.
So you didn't hear what I said about the bonds?
That's why I'm asking. So my question is, wouldn't a default of Greece in those circumstances be just a default of Greece?
You probably weren't here at the beginning, because I explained that. We had a plan B, and we had a nuclear weapon. We had a nuclear weapon. Now, a nuclear weapon is not always a good thing to have. But nevertheless, on that occasion, it answers your question. Because, okay, let's retrace what you said. Because up until a point, you were absolutely right. Up until the point where, in March of 2015, Draghi starts printing money and giving the straw, as you put it, a nice metaphor, to various countries, including France, okay, and allowing them to continue breathing even if we defaulted. That's where you're wrong. Because if we defaulted at that point, okay, we're talking about the first few months, if Tsipras had backed me in what we had agreed would be our strategy. You see, Tsipras and I had agreed that that would be our strategy. Because of his great clash with Jens Weidmann of the Bundesbank, the only way he was allowed on the 1st of March to start giving the straw to these countries was if no debt that he already owned was written down. I owed him 29 billion. I had in my drawer, the right drawer of my desk, I had a ministerial decree by which I postponed the payment of those bonds of 29 billion to 2042. Why? Because of the movie. Remember 2042? Science fiction movie.
2049.
2049, yeah, something like that. Okay? That would have meant that Draghi would not be able to buy Italian debt. Okay? The reason why we lost it was because Tsipras signaled to Draghi that he wouldn't allow me to do it. It's like, you know, you have David and Goliath. David has a chance of winning the struggle against Goliath. He's got a little catapult. But if, as David is going into the battlefield, you take the catapult away from him, then you lose.
Okay, I would just like to say something. I owe you an insult as to all my friends to conclude. First, I said that we cannot go on and on because, you know, at the end, at least there was a little bit of disagreement. I think that the reason Yugoslavia fell apart was more complex.
Of course. I said economically.
Because, you know, we the big enigma is why Yugoslavia, which was held up as the most democratic, open, blah, 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 paid the most horrible price with the civil war. But let's drop that. Now, really to conclude, I will strike back at you with Monty Python, the same joke. You know, no, it's not. It's from the Life of Brian movie, I think. No,
Yeah, like-
where they have this Palestinian
What have the
front and
Romans
say,
done?
"What did the Romans do for us?"
Yeah.
You know, nothing.
Bridges.
Yes, yeah. And now I will say the same to you.
Roads.
What did Yanis do for us here? Nothing. Okay, he explained very well the Syriza situation. He gave us a wonderful overview of today's capitalism. He and so on and so on. But overall, it was nothing. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ. Hvala. Thank you very much and see you next time.
Varoufakis, author, academic economist, and Greece's former finance minister. He now leads the European Realistic Disobedience Front. Yanis Varoufakis with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to today's National Press Club Westpac address, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. My name is Anna Henderson. I'm the Chief Political Correspondent for
custodians, to the owners of Thank you very much. It is with a deep sense of obligation and duties to the custodians, to the owners of this land on which we're meeting, the Ngunnawal people, that I pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and in particular, and not just because last week we marked International Women's Day, I would like to mention the leading role of women, the women of the First Nations, as custodians of sophisticated and complex knowledge, as community organizers, and I think very importantly, as beacons of wisdom, especially for those of us who suffer from a masculine condition. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm looking forward to discussing with you several thoughts, ideas and concerns with a view to reclaiming on behalf of Europe and Australia, a shared future in a world which is changing, a world in which both Europe and Australia are becoming increasingly irrelevant. And to do so, I must add that, not merely as a European or Greek politician, but also a proud citizen of Australia. Europe and Australia are facing a common predicament. An existential threat, a creeping irrelevance which is due to two reasons. Firstly, we have invested far too little for far too long. And secondly, we have allowed ourselves to go along an ill-considered slide from strategic dependence on the United States to a non-strategic, self-defeating servility to Washington's agenda. Our present moment in Europe and Australia has been shaped by three different important post-war phases. The first phase was the Bretton Woods system from 1944 to 1971. America exited the Second World War as the only creditor country, the only surplus country. Bretton Woods was a remarkable recycling mechanism and in effect a dollar zone that was founded on fixed exchange rates, sustained by capital controls, and directed on the back of America's gigantic, at the time, trade surplus. With quasi-free trade being part of the deal, Washington dollarized Europe, Japan, and Australia as part of a deal, the purpose of which was to create aggregate demand for all those products coming out of the production lines of the manufacturing sector of the United States, which had become so remarkably productive and efficient during the war economy. Subsequently, the United States trade surplus operated like a vacuum cleaner, hoovering out of our countries the dollars they had sent us through their net exports. The result was 20 years of high growth, low unemployment, low inflation, beautifully boring banking, dwindling inequality, but alas, that golden era of capitalism, the Bretton Woods system, was dead in the water the moment the United States slipped from being a surplus country to a country with a very large trade deficit. The second phase was marked by the violent reversal of this recycling mechanism. The United States became the first hegemon in the history of humanity that increased its hegemony by boosting its trade deficit, by going further into the red. Operating like another powerful vacuum cleaner, the burgeoning American trade deficit hoovered up the world's net exports. And how did America pay for these imports? With dollars, which it also hoovered up from the rest of the world, as German, Japanese, and later Chinese capitalists sent to Wall Street more than 70% of their profits for recycling in Wall Street in the form of treasuries, government debt, real estate, shares, and of course, later on, the infamous derivatives. This audacious inverted recycling system, founded on America's deficits, required ever-increasing American deficits in order to remain stable. In the process, it gave rise to growth rates even faster than those under the Bretton Woods system. However, it also gave rise to gigantic macroeconomic and financial imbalances, as well as mind-numbing levels of inequality. The new era came complete with an ideology, remember neoliberalism, with a policy of letting finance rip, financialization, and a false sense of dynamic equilibrium. Remember the great moderation, which was built, of course, on hugely immoderate imbalances. Almost inevitably, on the back of this perpetual tsunami of capital, rushing in from the rest of the world to Wall Street, financiers fashioned gargantuan pyramids of complex derivatives, what Warren Buffett referred to as weapons of mass financial destruction. They went off, and we had the GFC, the global financial crisis. Capitalism and Wall Street were saved by the G7 central banks, that printed between April 2009 and last year. They printed all the G7 central banks together around 35 trillion American dollars. That was one reason capitalism was saved. The second was China. China directed half its national income to investment, and in so doing replaced a lot of the lost aggregate demand, not just domestically in China, but also in the United States, in Germany, and Australia. The third period, the third phase, is more recent. I call it the era of techno-feudalism, and that's the book I kindly mentioned. I believe that this third era took root in the mid-2000s, but grew strongly after the GFC in conjunction with a rapid technological change that caused capital to mutate into a new form. I call it cloud capital. It's what lives inside your phone, inside your laptop. It's an automated means of behavioral modification. Consider the 6 things that cloud capital does. Where do you encounter it? When you go into Amazon.com, when you go into Uber. The 6 things that cloud capital does: it grabs our attention, first. It manufactures our desires. Third, it sells directly to us the things that will satiate the desires that it has manufactured. Fourth, it drives and monitors workers in the workplace, whether the workplace is a factory, an Amazon warehouse, or the cab of a truck in which a driver monitored by the same algorithm works. Fifth, it elicits massive free labor from all of us every time we click, we like, or we post whatever we do on the internet. And finally, it provides the potential for blending seamlessly all that with digital payments. Is it any wonder that the owners of this cloud capital, I call them cloudalists, is it any wonder that these cloudalists have hitherto undreamt of power? They are already a new ruling class. If you look at the capitalization of the 7 cloudalist firms in the United States, also known as the Magnificent Seven, you'll find that their capitalization of those 7 firms is larger than the capitalization of every listed company in the following countries: United Kingdom, France, Japan, Canada, and China taken together. Where did the money come for so much cloud capital to accumulate? Where did all this investment come from? Remember the $35 trillion that the G7 central banks produced after the GFC? That's where the money came. One example, 9 out of $10 invested by Zuckerberg in Facebook came from central bank money. So the issue, ladies and gentlemen, is not what will AI do to us in the future. The issue is what it has already done to us. And now a question of immense importance to Europe and to Australia. In which countries is cloud capital concentrated? In the United States and in China. Nowhere else. Hold that thought, I'll come back to it. First, let's say a few words about Europe. Most of you will know me as the failed finance minister of the most bankrupt state in Europe. Though I take solace that some people here in Canberra, including one or two government ministers, remembered me as their Sydney University economics lecturer. In my defense, and lest we forget, the reason why I was elected to the finance minister in 2015 was because we had a catastrophic, cataclysmic collapse, not just of Greece, but the whole of the Eurozone, the whole of the European Union's banking sector, and then a domino effect, with Greece being simply the canary in the mine. The reason why Europe was so severely damaged by the GFC was the ludicrous monetary architecture that we had erected. We had a monetary union that had a central bank without a treasury to have its back, and we had 19 treasuries without a central bank to have their back while they were trying to bail out 19 separate banking systems that were all bankrupt. In short, even if European governments wanted, after 2008, to emulate the sensible response to the GFC of the Rudd administration, of the Rudd government, we simply lacked the institutions to do it in Europe. And the result was the European doom loop between banking losses, stagnation, unpayable public and private debts, and an investment strike lasting a quarter of a century. The result of which today is Europe's, and in particular Germany's, deindustrialization. Quarter of a century later, whereas once, 25 years ago, we had a debilitating north-south divide in Europe, now we also have an east-west divide, in addition to the north-south divide. While the essential fiscal and political union that Europe needs is further away from the horizon than ever. The European Union's so-called Green Deal is honored in the breach, not in the implementation. Europe's industries are falling behind their competitors in the United States and China in every technological race that matters, particularly green technology and green energy. And our continent lacks cloud capital in the age of techno-feudalism, where power stems from owning copious amounts of cloud capital. The capital that only the United States and China possess. In my introduction, I said, controversially, I hope, that Europe and Australia are facing irrelevance and marginalization. Two other reasons. One, neither Europe nor Australia possess sufficient quantities of cloud capital. It's a bit like trying to make your way in the 19th century without steam engines and locomotives. The second reason is the new Cold War, which is upending Europe's and Australia's business model. Speaking of the new Cold War, almost a year ago, in this prestigious institution, Paul Keating lambasted the Albanese government for making their own call in allowing Australia to become complicit in Washington's pursuit of that new Cold War, against Australia's interests. The one question that Paul Keating did not ask was, why is Washington doing this? What lies behind the new Cold War? Why did President Trump kickstart this confrontation with the banning of Huawei and ZTE and then the aluminium tariffs? And please don't say that that's what Trump does, because Joe Biden, who was supposed to be the anti-Trump, gets elected, and what does he do? He turbocharges that Cold War by declaring economic warfare against Beijing, because that is what you do when you say you are not going to be allowed to import advanced microchips. When I ask this question in the United States amongst my friends there, I get two answers as to the rationale behind the new Cold War. One is Taiwan. The escalating military threat to international trade by the Chinese government. Taiwan and escalation. I'm afraid I remain depressingly unconvinced. I wish I could have been convinced. Ever since Nixon went to China, and during the long period when Washington was strong-arming Australia, Europe, to accept China in the World Trade Organization, in the circuits of international capitalism, it was very clear that the one China policy was a given. That Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan was never contested by the West. So what has changed? As for China's military threat, I'm afraid that on this I'm with Malcolm Fraser when he opined once that we won't be able to talk about a provocation of the Chinese military when Chinese Navy ships anchored just outside the San Diego base of the US Navy in the United States or outside of Virginia. And please, can someone explain to me the rationale behind the accusation that China is threatening international shipping routes when China is a country that depends entirely on a current account surplus and importing energy? Why would they ever want to jeopardize international shipping routes? No, ladies and gentlemen, the new Cold War is neither due to Taiwan nor to China. The answer lies, this is my hypothesis, in cloud capital. America's hegemony since 1971 is built on its trade deficit, which is a paradox. And that, however, relies entirely on its capacity to maintain its monopoly over international dollar-denominated payments. That's what allows the United States to make the rest of the world pay for its deficits. But Chinese cloud capital has already achieved something that the dollar system has not achieved and cannot achieve. It has seamlessly integrated cloud capital with financial services. For example, take WeChat, an application that is provided by Chinese conglomerate Tencent. It allows anyone who has a one account to make free payments anywhere. Free payments, independently of where they bank. That is not available in Australia, in Europe, in the United States. Similarly, the digital currency of the central bank. Why is there no American equivalent to this? It's really very simple. Because Wall Street will not allow it. Wall Street refuses to share financial rents either with the West Coast Silicon Valley cloud elites or with the Federal Reserve. And there's the rub. America still maintains its dominance over international payments, payments that are traveling along a rickety dollar highway full of potholes and technological backwardness, which nevertheless remains the highway of choice for global money. Meanwhile, Chinese cloud capital has constructed an all-singing, all-dancing payment superhighway denominated in one that very few use. But this superhighway's very existence is a clear and present danger to the American monopoly of the dollar payment system on which America's hegemony rests, especially after the war in Ukraine created jitters amongst oligarchs from Saudi Arabia to Indonesia to the Philippines, and some in Europe as well, who started using that superhighway, fearing that their monies may be confiscated at some point. In short, the new Cold War has nothing to do with trade routes, Taiwan, or Chinese escalation. It is rather the manifestation of a dangerous clash between two techno-feudal systems, one denominated in dollars, the other in Chinese yuan. So, if I'm right, the question becomes, what should Australia do in this topsy-turvy world, which is increasingly techno-feudal? At the domestic front, first, we, and I say we, because I am the proud carrier of an Australian passport, as I said. The first thing we must do is we must ditch the old rentier business model of banking on holes and homes, because this old model of Australia is now a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme whose maintenance will result in a country marred by minimal investment in the things that matter, low productivity, debilitating inequality, high inflation, and low wages, pushing the talented people of this country, especially the young, into a low innovation sinkhole. Instead, we should adopt in this country a Green New Deal for Australia as a necessity, not as a luxury. Give you an example. Europe is about to introduce border adjustment carbon tax. America surely will follow. So will others. So Australia must end its dependence on dirty fossil fuels and unrefined minerals and let rip on solar. Solar power and wind, but primarily solar, to do what with it? To produce green hydrogen. To do what with it? Not to export it, but to use it domestically in a new manufacturing sector, intermediate manufacturing sector, that refines copper, cobalt, nickel into green copper, green cobalt, green steel, and then transport it and export it to Asia, where the batteries will be manufactured, that will go into the electric vehicles that will be sold to Europe and the rest of the world as green technology. That, I think, is the future for an Australia that participates in the international distribution of green labor. But for that to happen, this country needs a massive injection of public investment. The private sector will not do it. Nothing short of a latter-day 1950s snowy scheme is necessary here. Second, acknowledge that it has never been more dismal to be young in this country. Reverse the absurdity of the Australian government collecting more money from HECS than it does from the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax. Tax rents properly to make higher education free again. And negative gearing, and in particular, the egregious, inane capital gains exemption over real estate investment. Tax those with concentrated power to set prices, and tax them through the nose. And move away from the mentality of tax cuts as something which is clever and good. It is neither clever nor good. You care about the youth? Build social housing. Because social housing has a twin effect. Firstly, it benefits those who take it. Secondly, by increasing supply, it reduces or caps the inflation in the prices of private homes. So everybody benefits. That's the second thing I would do. The third, since Australian capitals cannot compete with the big tech, the capitalists of the west coast of the United States, or of China, it is the role of the Australian government, in the same way that it once created the ABC or CSIRO, it is the role of the Australian government to put at the disposal of Australians important new technologies, to build up public cloud capital, beginning with a digital Australian dollar that the Reserve Bank of Australia can provide tomorrow. Essentially, a free checking account for every resident of this country, based on your tax file number with a PIN number, receiving on your deposits there the interest rate provided by the Reserve Bank of Australia to those who already have accounts with them, the bankers, at the overnight rate. What about international? First, Australia must restore a reputation tainted by blindly following America into lethal adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan. And today, via its active and crucial complicity in Israel's deliberate war crimes in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, children are not starving in Gaza today. No, they are being deliberately starved, without hesitation and without remorse. The famine in Gaza is not collateral damage. It is intentional policy, the purpose of which is to defeat a population and ultimately to root them out of that land. By lending credence to the notion that Israel is exercising the right to self-defense, and by defunding on the basis of unsubstantiated allegations, the only agency that can ameliorate the starvation in Gaza, Australia damaged its already wounded reputation. Reversing this decision is too little too late now. Just as there was a bipartisan campaign led by Malcolm Fraser and Bob Hawke to end South African apartheid against the wishes of Washington that supported the white supremacists in Pretoria. The Australian political class needs to lead a campaign to end apartheid in Israel-Palestine and to restore equal civil liberties to Israelis and Palestinians. This is the duty of every nation, but it is especially the duty of this one. Why? Because of the sorry history of terror use. The white settlers' ideological cover for the genocide of the native population, which was transported from British outposts like Australia to the land of Palestine and Israel, with the banner, a land without a people, for a people without a land. That's terror use. Second, Australia has a duty to de-escalate the new Cold War. I've already made this point, but I need to make it once more. To understand that this can only be done if Australia ends its servility to the United States, a United States that is actively creating threats that then makes us pay through the nose to be protected from. Imagine an Australia that helps bring a just peace in Ukraine, as opposed to a mindless forever war that is going nowhere. A non-aligned Australia that is never neutral in the face of injustice, but also not automatically aligned with every warmongering adventure decided by its allies. Imagine an Australia which having re-established its credentials as a country that thinks and acts on its own behalf, engages with China in a spirit of peaceful cooperation, a far better way of addressing Beijing's increasing authoritarianism towards its own people than buying useless, hyper-expensive submarines that only succeed in forcing China's political class to close ranks around an authoritarian core. Imagine a truly patriotic Australian Prime Minister who tells the American president to cease and desist from the slow murder of my friend Julian Assange. For what? For the crime of journalism. For exposing to American citizens the crimes that their government and our governments have perpetrated behind our backs in our name. In the end, that will make for a better friendship with the United States, because, believe you me, one of the few things I've learned while I was in office, that short period of time, American power brokers appreciate you more if you can say no to them. They would appreciate and independently minded Australia more than they appreciate today's Australia. In the same way you appreciate a friend who tells you you're wrong when you're wrong, rather than say yes to everything you do and then win behind your back. To conclude, if Europe and Australia are to escape gross irrelevance, we need separate but well-coordinated Green New Deals, one for Europe, one for Australia. But none of that is going to work. In a world buffeted by an uncontrollable new Cold War that threatens the green transition, which is necessary to preserve the viability of our species. To have a future, Europe and Australia must end our mindless slide from strategic dependence on the United States to improvised, impulsive, inexpedient servility to the United States. DiEM25, our pan-European movement, is working towards this goal, especially now in view of the European Parliament elections in the coming June. In the last fortnight, while I was here in Australia, during this visit, I was thrilled to discover many talented Australians full of wonderful ideas of how to do this in this country, as well as effective organizations dedicated to the same cause. Optimism is perhaps not yet empirically founded, but hope burns brightly. Thank you.
Thank you for your address. I think one of the main issues that you've taken up in your conversation here is around how Australia is aligning itself with the United States on a military level. Just in the last week, our Foreign Minister Penny Wong was again warning of destabilising, provocative and coercive action by China. Is there a risk that you're actually a bit blind to the defence reality in the region in how you're framing this debate? And what do you say to those who see your position as quite naive on this because of the realities of different defence superpowers and their military build-up and the economics behind that?
Was there a Chinese vessel entering territorial waters in Australia, in Japan, in the United States? No. So the only risk here is that you allow somebody like the foreign minister to get away with subterfuge and by creating a false perspective on a threat which is not there. The Chinese people have every reason to fear their government. If you are a student at the Hong Kong Polytechnic, you are terrorized by a very authoritarian regime. If you're a Muslim, you have difficulties in particular provinces, as we've well known in China. My friends and comrades in China feel that there is an increasing authoritarian noose around their neck. That is a threat, and we need to help Chinese Democrats and Chinese progressives and some Chinese socialists. We need to help them liberate themselves from that noose. We are not going to do it by allowing Penny Wong and other warmongers to create a false sense that China is threatening Australia when that is not the case, in order to weaponize a particular defensive military-industrial complex motivated policy, which in the end is the best gift you can make to the elements of the Chinese Communist Party who use this clear misrepresentation of the situation in the Pacific in order to crack down on their own people.
Our next question is from Tom Connell.
Tom Connell on the board here and also from Sky News. Thank you for your speech. I want to go back to 2015 when President Xi Jinping was in the White House with Obama and he pledged not to militarise the South China Sea, the islands there. He then went and did that. Isn't that a threat that emanated from the Chinese side, a change in what they said they would do that needed to be responded to? In a similar way, China's made no secret of wanting bases that happen to be close to Australia in the Pacific. Aren't they real risks and threats that do need responding to? Debate how you do it, but they do need responding to?
Whenever in the diplomatic sphere there is backtracking, there has to be a diplomatic language for responding to it, and sometimes some action when in terms of some military maneuvers that are proportional to the threat. But allow me to pose the question slightly differently. What happened with Europe and NATO's expansion after all the successive pledges that there would be no expansion of NATO? Pledges to Yeltsin, to Putin, which were completely and utterly violated by the West. Does that justify Putin's weaponization of this particular violation of pledges in order, in the end, even to invade Ukraine? I don't think so. So, proportional responses, yes. Do I have a problem with militarization? I do. Do I believe that the answer to the militarization of particular islands in the South China Seas is essentially to turbocharge a new Cold War that destroys our business model, and which essentially, the only thing it does, it solidifies the power base of the particular segment of the Communist Party in Beijing, which you consider to be the source of the violation of that trust? I don't believe so. In other words, let's keep our heads. Let's maintain diplomatic proportionality. And certainly, let's not have $368 billion spent on submarines, which are completely useless to Australia, that will do nothing to ameliorate those threats that we're talking about, and which the seller to Australia has a button that can press, and suddenly, like a Tesla car, can be switched off by Elon Musk at will. You are not going to be able to use your submarines for the purpose of Australia's defensive moves.
Our next question comes from Julie Hare.
Julie Hare from the Australian Financial Review. Thank you so much for your speech. You speak about the new cloud capital, cloud capitalism, I don't know, and the new ruling class. You talk about the GFC being a pivotal point in the development of that. Could you please explain to us how the GFC played the role in the development of this new capital?
It paid for it. The GFC caused our great and good leaders to congregate in London in April 2009 in a state of panic, naturally, because the whole system was going pear-shaped. And they decided to refloat finance. Between that April of 2009, under the chairmanship of Gordon Brown, if you remember, who was Prime Minister of Britain at the time, till last year, they printed $35 trillion. Now, at the same time, they were practicing austerity in Europe, in Britain, even in the United States, despite Obama's alleged stimulus program. What happens when you pump huge quantities of freshly minted monies into the financial system? It's full of liquidity, it's drowning in liquidity, and you have austerity in the real economy. What happens is the Bank of America or Deutsche Bank or Citigroup, they pick up the phone, they call an industrialist, British Aerospace or General Electric, and say, I've got 500 million, I'll give it to you for free, 0 interest rate. Will you take it? Now, if you're GE, right, you look around and you see no demand for your products. You already have cash, which you are too scared to invest, but you still get it for zero interest rate. You say, yes, give it to me. But you don't invest it. What you do is you go to the stock exchange and you buy back your own shares. The share price goes up, your bonus goes up, no investment. The only firms that actually invested in capital were the cloud-based, the Zuckerbergs, and the Googles, and so on and so forth. This is why I'm saying, this is my hypothesis, or thesis if you want, that our central banks paid for the explosion in the quantity and therefore the quality in the final analysis of cloud capital.
What would have happened if austerity, if they'd gone towards austerity as opposed to what you're describing here?
Well, let's say that they, instead of giving it to the bankers, the central banks were to go in association with a public investment bank to put money into green tech. Well, in Europe, we wouldn't be dependent on Putin's Gazprom the way we were once he invaded Ukraine. We would have had good quality jobs in the United States. We wouldn't have had Trump. We wouldn't have had the alternative for Deutschland, because all these neo-fascists, this is what I call them, right? Because I'm too old and tired to try to find polite terms. All these neo-fascists grew up because they surfed the wave of discontent caused by the combination of socialism for the bankers and austerity for everyone else.
Paul Karp.
Paul Karp from The Guardian, thanks very much for your speech. Many of your domestic policy solutions like the Green New Deal or cutting housing tax concessions would be good for the environment and good for inequality, but I can't see how they would do anything to prevent this techno-feudalism, the problem that you've described in your speech. Could I please ask firstly, what do you think of more extreme policy solutions like the US breaking up big tech companies or Australia banning tech companies from collecting users' data? And secondly, do you think consumers would be keen to sign up to a government bank account, a government Uber and a government Amazon as a publicly owned alternative?
Firstly, I did mention the importance of, for instance, the government, in the same way that they created CSIRO and the ABC, to create a public cloud capital infrastructure which can be used either at the level of the state, for instance, the Reserve Bank provided you. Why don't you answer your own question? If the Reserve Bank of Australia gave you a digital wallet with a PIN number, and you could put your salary in there and make free payments to anyone. Free payments, not just cash. And you were to receive on your deposits the overnight interest rate of the Reserve Bank of Australia. Would you say no to that?
I can see how public option
You wouldn't say no to that. You would not say no to that.
Wouldn't the cloudless still be hoovering up all my?
No. This is public lecture. And you can have Australian Parliament safeguard the anonymity of the payments and safeguard your privacy a lot better than the Commonwealth Bank of Australia or any post-Western excluded today. As for a government Uber, I wouldn't want a government Uber. It would be ludicrous to have a government Uber, but it would be brilliant if we had a cooperative of drivers with their own cloud capital, their own algorithm, so that they would retain the rents and the proceeds from their customers rather than having them being skimmed off via Luxembourg, that's how Uber works, Ireland to the Cayman Islands, right? So I'm talking about a cooperative enterprise here that is assisted through legislation by the Australian Parliament. Finally, I agree with you entirely that we need a digital bill of rights so that we own our data, and more so than our data, it is high time that we own our digital identity. Because you and I have no way of proving who we are on the internet unless we beg some conglomerate or bank to vouch for who we are. Because unlike the analog world, where, our states provide us with a driver's license or a passport, which proves who we are, and the internet, they don't. You have to beg Google to testify to who you are. So these small changes can make a very big difference.
Our next question is from Balad Al-Kaki.
So just here for the Australian Associated Press. You've included some suggestions about potential business models or technologies that can be useful, including a public cloud capital to counteract the concentration of power among tech giants. What hope can this give for small business owners in a cost of living crisis?
Well, to begin with, the cost of living crisis here is a double-edged sword, because companies like Amazon or Walmart in the United States have an ideology of cheapness. But that cheapness, in the end, bites us on the backside, because that cheapness means that all the value that is created by companies producing the stuff that is sold on their platforms is skimmed off from the producers and is siphoned off into the account of Jeff Bezos. And from there, it doesn't go anywhere, because if you have $200, $300 billion, I mean, if I give you another dollar, how can you spend it? You can't spend it even if you want to, right? So putting the lid on what Amazon can do is, in the end, through secondary and tertiary effects, in the interests of the whole of the economy, including small businesses. But I would, as a first step, recommend, for instance, to the Australian government that it does what the Indonesian government does. Other governments, Turkey, slap a 5% cloud tax on digital purchases. Really very simple. You tax the purchase, which is detrimental to the possibility that a small shop can trade without effectively trading through a platform that will skim off whatever value it produces. And if you want to take this further, if you feel radically, you can say to these platforms that if you want to trade in this country, you're going to have to deposit 10% of your shares in our sovereign wealth fund, where the dividends accumulate and they are distributed to the people of Australia as a basic income, or basic dividends for themselves.
Our next question comes from Simon Gross.
Simon Gross, Canberra IQ, cloud capitalism. You're basically talking about the digitalisation of so much of what we do in commerce and in dealing with government. And you're seeing average citizens as victims. I just want to relate this to Greece. When you had the big financial problem, one of the things we got to learn was the high level of tax evasion and tax avoidance that is like a national sport in Greece. Last month, the IMF came out with this report about recent themes of informality. That's the term they use for the tax avoidance evasion. And they say that the digitalisation is a major factor that helped reduce informality in Greece. So can you just extemporise a bit about the goods and the bads of this, the digitalisation of our lives?
I'm all for digitalisation. I love technology. I'm not a Luddite or neo-Luddite. I don't want to smash the machines and go back to a bucolic lifestyle. As a finance minister, it was my intention effectively to ban cash, to make all transactions digital in order to do away with the problem of tax evasion. That wasn't very appreciated by the vast majority of tax evaders. But you see, the point I want to make, if I may, is this. My concept of cloud capital is not a critique of digitalization. It is a critique of the fact that we have particular companies that own so much cloud capital that can modify our behavior in such a way as to allow the owners of that digital capital or cloud capital to amass rents, which is another form of hypersonic tax evasion or evasion of everything. Because think, Amazon pays no tax. You realize that? Zero.
Yeah, it's
zero.
It's
zero.
Very dodgy stuff, yes.
Zero. Okay? Zero. It's all legal. Zero.
They'd probably say something different, but they'd probably be...
Of course they would say something different.
Like it wouldn't be as much as they should.
I only need to state that they pay zero tax.
Okay.
Last year, I looked at the numbers. They had 46 billion euros, 46 billion euros revenues in Europe, and they paid zero. Okay, now whatever you tell me, I'm not convinced that they had no profits. Okay? And they paid zero. Okay. So digitalization is not a solution to tax evasion when the whole value chain is being taken to the Cayman Islands by Jeff Bezos. So yes to digitalization, but at the same time we need to take over the ownership of these chunks of cloud capital that allows them to create a series of different problems,
So
not just the
take
tax
o-
evasion.
You say take over, what do you mean?
Well, for instance, I gave the example before of how an alternative Uber could operate. A cooperative which belongs to the workers, to the drivers, and they have the algorithm. It is part of the capital of the cooperative, and then you have digitalization of the taxi service, but it doesn't go to the Cayman Islands. It does not create circumstances of psychological despair amongst the drivers, and it doesn't exploit your data the way that Uber does. That's an example. Socialization of the algorithm, not nationalization.
Okay.
Tony Melville.
Tony Melville, Director of the National Press Club. I wasn't going to talk about tax evasion, but one of my favourite, maybe, of Greek stories was when a tax was introduced on swimming pools. There was a huge sale of tarpaulins as people covered up their backyards to the equipment hot pool. But my question goes back to your comment about being the, and I quote you, the failed finance minister, former finance minister of the most bankrupt state in Europe.
Yep.
There's quite a big Greek community here today, and how about something positive about Greece in terms of how the economy is going there?
I'm not going to indulge in fantasy. Okay, you want something positive?
Yeah.
I'll say it in Greek and then I'll translate. Η Ελλάδα ποτέ δεν πεθαίνει. That is, I'll translate. Greece cannot be killed. It's very hard to kill. Right?
Most of the people here today have paid for their lunches using credit cards. Everyone is using credit cards all the time. As you pointed out, the Reserve Bank of Australia has actually looked at and investigated, although we haven't seen any results of their investigation, they've looked at the possibility of introducing some alternative form of transaction. At the moment, between 1 and 3% of all Australia's GDP is effectively going overseas to a number of multinationals. What can we do now? Why
vote for politicians who have what it takes to introduce it?
What if you can't find any?
Well, then you run. Then you create it. No, but seriously. In China today, whatever you may think about China, the United States and all that, as we speak, there are 180 million digital wallets that already are running, and they're not just used by Chinese. I know German entrepreneurs who use them because they buy aluminium from Shenzhen, they bring it to Germany, they make propellers for the shipyards in Shanghai, and then they send the propellers to Shanghai. Instead of going to their bank managers in Deutsche Bank to send money to the Bundesbank, that goes to the European Central Bank, that goes to the Central Bank of China, that then goes to their private accounts and makes a payment to get the aluminium, and then the whole process being reversed. They have a digital wallet provided by the Central Bank of China. They make the payment by just pressing one button, no fees, no questions asked, the money goes backwards and forwards. Why can the Chinese do this and we can't? It's not that the Reserve Bank of Australia can't do it or they have to look into it again and again. They can do it yesterday. The banks won't let them because they demand the monopoly of the payment system, and that is a scandal that they have it. Because, you know, if you ask an economic student, what is the role of the bank? They say, oh, they're intermediaries. They take deposits from Jill and they lend them to Jack. That's not what they do. That is a fiction. What they do is because in order to make a payment to have your lunch or to get a coffee from a coffee shop, you need to have a private account. Otherwise, there's no card. Well, if the Reserve Bank gave them that card, then suddenly the banks would have to provide genuine services to their customers, something they do not want to do. Except Westpac, of course.
Do you think Australian consumers would prefer to have that and actually reduce their fees rather than the Qantas points or other things like that?
Well, to the extent that Australian consumers are not totally idiotic, yes.
We've got a few more questions to go. I just wanted to take you to one part of your address where you did speak about Australia, in your view, blindly following the US. And
in my view, okay.
And in terms of the way that you've raised that concern around the pausing of funding in Gaza, we do seek a variety of perspectives here at the Press Club, of course, to hear different sides of the viewpoints on these issues. Is it not important that countries like Australia and the many other countries who have also taken pause on that funding to investigate when those kinds of issues are raised?
Of course, investigate to your heart's content. But don't stop feeding the starving while you're investigating. You would never have done that in any other part of the world. Of course, everything needs to be investigated, but you know what? We're missing the point. The point is that as we speak, there are people who are bombed and people who are starved, and Australia is whistling in the wind. And that is not good for Australia's image in the whole wide world, in the global south, but also in the global north, amongst the youngsters who in 10 years' time will be the decision makers and who, even in the United States, are appalled by this complicity in so much suffering.
Tom Cole again. I won't thank you for your speech again. I might just thank you for inspiring the magnificent lamb lunch, which is really good. You've spoken about the power of big tech. Roosevelt once upon a time broke up big oil and big railway because they were bad for the country. Maybe big tech is still bad for the US, but they bring in so much money, it's a part of the share market. Probably not. China, a similar thing. So if they don't want it to happen, how would that play out if the rest of the world and countries sort of combined to try to bring on not a hobble big tech, while the US and China want those companies to be as big as they are? Is that going to be a problem?
Of course it's going to be a problem. Whenever you are faced with exorbitant power, you have an exorbitant problem. There's no doubt about that. What I'm saying is that we need to try. But it is a mistake to think of the task at hand in the same way that we thought in the 1910s about trust busting. Theodore Roosevelt famously and very courageously broke up Standard Oil, Rockefeller's monopoly. That was very difficult politically, but technically dead easy. Because there you had an oil company, petrol company, having all these petrol stations across the United States. It was one thing, one monolithic company, and what the company did was say, okay, fine, we break it down to 50 companies, one per state. It's quite straightforward to do. You can't do this with Google. The whole point about Google is that it's universal. That you search. How do you break up? You take YouTube away from the Google search engine, the whole thing collapses. So I don't believe that the solution will come by emulating that which happened in the 1910s. We need a completely different approach. I think there are 3 steps or 4 steps that I would recommend, or a number of, there are lots of things you can do, but it's not the old-fashioned regulation. The first thing you need to do is impose interoperability. That is, at the moment, if you don't want to get out of Elon Musk's X, or Twitter, as we mostly know it, you can. There's Blue Sky, there are many alternatives, and technically, technologically, they are just as good or better. But I have 1 million followers on Twitter. If I leave and go to Blue Sky, I will not have even myself as my follower.
It's a good problem to have. It's a good problem to have.
It's a good problem to have, maybe. Not if you want to, to speak your mind, right? Seriously now. No, but imagine if you could actually to take your followers with you, which is what the telephone companies. Remember, a long time ago, you could not take your telephone number, your own mobile number, from Telstra to Optus. right? Until the government said, no, you can't. Now, that is technically very easy to allow the transfer of a telephone number. To allow all your data that you have on Facebook to go somewhere else is another matter. So you can do that. You can have a digital bill of rights so that if they use your data, they will have to pay you. Pennies, but pay you. Thirdly, what I said about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Deposit shares there and therefore give the people of Australia and the Australian Parliament a say in the meetings of the shareholders. These are more radical, but I think smarter approaches. When it comes to the algorithms, you need to have, in the same way you have, the federal police, you can create a federal unit, the purpose of which is to work out subterfuge and illegality that has been implanted into algorithms. For instance, let me give you an example, right? When you are a publisher, newspaper, or whatever, a vendor in Amazon.com, at first they lure you in by elevating you quite up there, and so you see a lot of trade. They bring you in, you do a lot and more and more trade on Amazon because you're making money. The moment they have caught you, right, they push you down. And then they blackmail you and they say you have to pay us this amount of your revenue if you're going to be elevated again. That should be illegal. And there should be a way of simply taking these people to the cleaners.
Thank you. I understand that techno-feudalism is a global phenomenon, but I'm wondering if there's a natural system of politics that could, or government, to accompany techno-feudalism. And just secondly, do you believe social democracy can survive the challenge of the rise of far-right parties, particularly in Europe?
Well, it is a global phenomenon, just like capitalism was a global phenomenon. But that doesn't mean that it is the same everywhere. Like capitalism was not the same everywhere, Chile, Sweden, Australia, Poland, they're all capitalist countries, but very different within capitalism. Similarly, techno-feudalism in China is different to techno-feudalism in America. And one difference is the fact that I made the point about payment systems, which in China are far more efficient because the financiers do not control what the big tech does in China. The second point was?
The second question was actually
about social democracy.
Social democracy and the rise of right.
Look, I have a very, very sad view about this, very depressing view. I think social democracy died a long time ago and you didn't notice it. What do I mean by that? What was social democracy? It was the political project of governments bringing together the representatives of industrial capital, of the factories, and the trade unions, and cutting a deal between them, saying to the factory owners, okay, you will have industrial peace, we will be off your case, but a chunk of your profits, of your surplus value, will go to the state to fund Medicare, another chunk will go to workers for them to have a decent life. Okay? But after the end of Bretton Woods, we had a situation where the economic sphere split up, divided and multiplied between the industrial sphere and the financial sphere. So finance effectively broke off, created its own realm. And power moved from the industrial manufacturing sector to the banking sector. Once that happened, and especially with deindustrialization everywhere, in the United States, in Britain, here, all the factories went. Even if you're the Australian Prime Minister or the British Prime Minister or the American President, who do you bring around the table? The head of Goldman Sachs and the trades union, of nurses? What conversation can you have at that point? That's why I'm saying that and the reason why you see the waning of social democracy, the diminishing of the ambition of the ALP, where effectively the ALP said, okay, look, we'll get out of this. No awards, no collective bargaining agreements. We'll just introduce minimum wage and look after workers through the pension system or superannuation. That's the end of social democracy. This idea of a kind of grand bargain, a great contract between capital and labor has gone a long time ago, and the GFC killed it off completely. And now techno-feudalism has made it a figment of our imagination.
I don't know whether to thank you for that or not, but anyway, thank you.
Look, we'd just like to thank you very much for your time today. Efaristo.
Parakalo.
And give you a warm thank you from the group.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy our videos, make sure to
That was pretty good. All right. So thank you, Yes Daddy, for some great matches, and learned a lot of stuff with this dialogue here. So let's keep it going. See you next time.